welcome everyone. My name is Marga Haddad, and I'm very happy to be moderating this Ardian Summit Investing for a Climate Action, the hydrogen case study. Around this table, I am joined by Dominique Senequier, founder and president of Ardian, Mathias Burghardt, head of Ardian's infrastructure, and Amir Sharifi, managing director of Ardian Infrastructure Energy Transition Lead. And on the other side of the screen, we have you, our incredible audience, more than 1,000 participants. And of course, everything will be available on replay on Ardian's website. But stay with us, as it is much better to watch it live. Dominique Senequier, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for our first Hydrogen Summit. As the president of Ardian, my philosophy has always been that investing must be a force for good. This is why we felt it necessary to host this event in the important area of hydrogen, a key part of the energy transition. Thanks to the International Energy Agency and its executive director, Dr. Fatih Birol, it has become clear that hydrogen will be key in both carbon reduction and the wider energy transition. That is why we are here today, joined by some of the most innovative professionals and influential voices across the energy sector, including some long-standing friends and industry partners. I would like in particular to thank Secretary Ernest Moniz, one of the key contributors of COP21 success. Regardless of location, everyone here today is committed to making this energy transition a reality for the benefit of environment, business, and society. This is a major opportunity. We urge investors, businesses, and regulators to work together to create an environment which means this alternative energy source can thrive. I'm very pleased to kick off this summit by a conversation with Patrick Pouyanez, CEO and chairman of the board at TotalEnergies. Although he could not attend the summit today, we met a few days ago to record this conversation, which you will see now. I hope everyone enjoyed the event. For us, hydrogen is so important. But it is just as important that we bring together other people so we can work towards this common goal. Hopefully today will lead to even more conversation and even more progress.
Let's watch the video.
I'm delighted to open this summit with Patrick Pouyanez, the chairman and CEO of TotalEnergies. Patrick has huge experience in energy. As you will know, as the leader of TotalEnergies, he is also at the forefront of energy transition. Patrick, you recently showed your ambition to be a global leader in the energy transition when Total became TotalEnergies. Of course, our focus today is on hydrogen. How will the use of hydrogen specifically help you in your mission?
First of all, Dominique, I'm very happy to be here with you, and so thank you for inviting me to participate in this summit. Yes, that's true that everything that will help to decarbonize and bring more energy is important for TotalEnergies. And hydrogen is a good candidate for sure. But before just speaking hydrogen, I would like to say a few words on the change of name from identity from Total to TotalEnergies. This new identity and new logo embodies the course that we want to be. We want to be a world-class player in the energy transition and more specifically among the top 5 of the renewables producer. Our company has become a broad energy company, committed to producing and providing energies, all sorts of energies, that must be affordable, reliable, and clean. Hydrogen is one of the 7 energies which are today represented in our new logo, that shall help us to reach the carbon neutrality ambition that we have. In TotalEnergies, we have quite a good knowledge about hydrogen because, in fact, we consume today and we produce 1% of the hydrogen demand in our refineries. However, hydrogen is very particular for several reasons, as you probably all know. It's not a primary energy. Hydrogen is the result of an industrial process. Second remark, hydrogen demand is in fact today quite small, 70 million tons, And 95% of hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels. Third remark, which is important, when you produce 1 ton of hydrogen from natural gas, you produce 10 tons of CO2. So you cannot think about hydrogen without thinking on the way you produce it. And fourth remark, important, hydrogen demand is quite small today just because it's expensive. In fact, the cost of hydrogen, which is produced from fossil fuels, is 3 times more expensive than natural gas. So it has some handicaps. So why do we speak today of hydrogen? Because it has potentially quite a bright future in the decarbonized world, in a no-carbon world. And it should be quite a good contributor to the carbon neutrality ambition, providing obviously that we can, of course, produce it at a very competitive cost. So what can be the uses of hydrogen? First, it can help to decarbonize some industrial sectors like refining, chemicals, fertilizers. So that's a first point. Hard to abate industries in terms of CO2 emissions. The second one, of course, it can be mixed with natural gas in order to, I would say, lower the carbon intensity of natural gas, adding hydrogen in natural gas networks. More interestingly for me, it's also a way to store energy. You know, when we produce, and Total will produce more and more renewable electricity, you will have to store part of this electricity generated when sun is high or wind is strong. And hydrogen is a good storage for electricity, and that's fundamental. But, and I'm going from least important to most important, I would say, when we think to transportation and the way to decarbonize transportation, we speak about, of course, EVs and electricity. But obviously, there are some, in particular, heavy duties, truck fleets, train already, maybe plane, where hydrogen can be very fundamental, one of the best energy carrier. Honestly, when I think to the heavy duty, in particular transportations, trucks, batteries are heavy, hydrogen should be the solution. And so we need to think to that as a real energy carrier. And the longer term view is that maybe for planes, for example, we can envisage hydrogen for, I would say, a short trip, up to 1,000 miles. Airbus is working on it. For longer trip, for transatlantic plane flight, we will need liquid fuels. So can we produce e-fuels, the dreams? It's a combination of CO2 and hydrogen coming from renewables. That's the future, probably. So that's something on which we need to think. But obviously, if we want to lower the cost from $5 per kilo to $1 per kilo, I mean, the cost of natural gas, this will require, I would say, a change of scale. This is, for me, the main message. Change of scale is obviously the key. Like we've done in the past, by the way. In the past, Total was a pioneer in what we LNG industry, liquefied natural gas, 40 years ago. Technologies were there, but there was a lack of demand market. And so we managed to lower the cost because we scale up all these technologies. And I think this might be, for me, the future role of Total Energies, to become a massive producer of hydrogen. And this, of course, will come because renewables are more competitive. The capex for electrolyzers are going down. And that should allow to open this new, I would say, world of hydrogen and economy of hydrogen for the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So now tell me, what does clean hydrogen mean for you?
That's an interesting debate. You know, there is plenty of colors there, not like my color, because we don't have the gray, but we have the blue and the green in my color, and the yellow, by the way. So we speak about gray hydrogen when it's produced from fossil fuels, but it emits a lot of CO2. So it's not obviously an option. So we need to think to other ways. Either we go from natural gas, fossil fuels, and we produce hydrogen, and we capture all the CO2. That's what we call the blue hydrogen. It costs five times more today than natural gas. It's maybe not the Graal, because still you will have to find huge gas CO2 storage. The other one is a green hydrogen, which is coming from renewable energies. In fact, it's you produce electricity from solar and wind, and you have electrolyzers, you transform water in hydrogen with electricity. There, the cost today is 10 times more, because producing, and we know it today, we don't produce hydrogen from water because it's expensive, more expensive than for natural gas. But in the future, with scale and having the cost of solar and wind energy going down, it's possible. So there again, developing the scale, market scale is fundamental. Blue hydrogen, as I said, will require to find very large CO2 storage. So of course, Total is very strong we know where to find very low-cost natural gas in Russia, in the Middle East, in North Africa. But we need to find as well these large CO2 storage. And so that's the next target. By the way, it's a new job for my geologists, maybe not finding oil and gas anymore, but finding where to store CO2. You can, transformation is also new métier in our companies. On the green hydrogen, there it's clearer. Finding space location where you can produce wind energy at a very low cost with a lot of wind, not necessarily connected to the grid, but just having a lot of wind. Patagonia might be an example in Chile, southern Chile, or large solar farms, desert of Mauritania, next to a coast in order to be able to export. And then combining that with progress in electrolyzers farms, that might be, I think, the best solution for the future. Of course, we'll have to think also to the transportation hydrogen. People do not know, but today nobody transports hydrogen. So there is nothing. And one of the challenges of an area to invest is the logistics for hydrogen, because there is no hydrogen carrier, there is no hydrogen networks, everything has to be invested. This is why sometimes you hear people speaking about ammonia, because ammonia is a cousin, I would say, of hydrogen, and you can transport more easily ammonia. You have the logistics already. Ammonia, by the way, can be used to decarbonize coal-fired power plants, and Japanese are thinking to that market, and that might be a way to begin to start this new industry. So I think the fight for climate change is just requires all options, all solutions today. We should not select too much. We must push blue, green. Some will speak about yellow coming from nuclear, not Total Energies, because I don't know that word. But I think it's important because we need to accelerate again the cost reduction by developing the market.
Thank you. And how do you think the international market for hydrogen will develop?
I think it will develop again if government, policymakers are able to develop the demand. I mean, fundamentally today, if we believe in it, because again, people think a lot about the supply side, but there is no way to invest in supply and to invest in very large plants if we do not have the demand. So today it's a chicken and egg. The energy transition, I think something is wrong in many mindsets. They think that we can make the transition if we produce more renewables. It's only a supply story. It's not true. Again, hydrogen is a perfect example. The demand is small. So if we want to grow this market, demand is essential. And then policymakers can help. Because they can, for example, say, in Europe, you will have in all natural gas networks, you should inject 5-10% of hydrogen. You create a market. Or, like they've done with EVs, for transportation, they could create regulations which would force the new truck generation beyond 2030 to become hydrogen-driven. Trains might be another. So there are ways to help this demand to come, and then mobility is important. That's why within Total we are beginning to invest. You probably noticed that very recently we have decided to invest in something which is not so natural, in a taxi fleet in Paris. Why? Because captive fleets are very interesting. If you have a captive fleet, we will have at least 600 taxis driven by hydrogen in Paris. So not only it's good for our reputation and the image, but also for working. It creates a momentum, it creates a market, and then you can begin to lower the cost of producing hydrogen. So that's something on which I think is important. In Germany, we are part of the H2 mobility networks in order to develop also some hydrogen stations for the future. The infrastructure, I mean, I speak about chicken and egg with demand and supply. There is another important part, and I think Ardian is strong in it, which is the infrastructure. EVs today, one of the limitations, and there is always a call to government because car manufacturers are willing to produce more and more EV fleets. but there is no infrastructure, charging points, etc. Hydrogen will be the same story. So we need to find the right leverage to demonstrate, to develop as well the whole infrastructure for hydrogen.
Yes. Do we need specific rules or regulations to help the international trading of hydrogen?
Yes, definitely yes. I think we need it. It will not come alone from the private investments because, again, every investor, even if you can see some technologies developing, emerges, again, scale is important. So governments, policymakers, like in all, I would say, in all this energy transition. Of course, you need investors, entrepreneurs, innovations. That's fundamental, and that's our jobs, I would say, as companies. But you need also to force the customers, because the customers, you know, as I said in my introduction, they want fundamentally, yes, they want a clean energy, but they want an affordable, cheap energy. That's clear, everybody. And so if you don't force a little these people to accept to pay a little more before you see the cost going down, the demand will not be there. So that's, I think, a clear call. It's strange for me as a private entrepreneur to call for it, but I think the energy transition will need this support. And so I think, as I said, hydrogen will be a game changer. I'm convinced of that. Maybe not in the next 5 years, but you know, in this energy transition, there is a sort of exponential acceleration, what I have observed. By the way, I would have not believed that I would have transformed my company Total when I became CEO 5 years ago in Total Energies today. So, you know, world is changing, society is changing, and so we must all change. And so, by the way, you, Dominique, what made you choose to dedicate a summit to hydrogen today?
For us, the reasons are clear and simple. Firstly, the role of hydrogen in the energy transition is now widely recognized. The hydrogen value chain is firmly a part of sustainable finance. Everyone recognizes that hydrogen will play a key role in our future. Secondly, sustainability is at the heart of Ardian's culture. All of our processes take ESG into account. We have incentives for the managers in our portfolio companies based on ESG criteria. Third, simply, it is essential. As a private investment house, we are convinced that the most sustainable companies will have the greatest long-term value to all stakeholders. As a pioneer in renewable energy investments, we know there will be a first-mover advantage for strategic investors. Why host this summit, you ask? Well, we know that hydrogen will play a key role in our future, but many people need to come together to make it happen. The question now is, how do we mitigate the remaining risks to investing in hydrogen? To answer this question, we will need a combination of three factors. One, industrial players working together across geographies, like you. Two, the right level of government and regulatory support. And three, investors with a vision for sustainability. This is why we have gathered the most prominent players from these three fields for the summit today. Patrick, I would like to warmly thank you for the time you have given us today to start our wider discussions about this very important topic. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for inviting me to this hydrogen and ESG summit. Total Energies is very committed, and I have no doubt that with the quality of the guests which will speak about me, all your colleagues and people participating will have a very exciting discussions. And thank you again, Dominique.
Thank you, Patrick.
What an interesting discussion on hydrogen. Dominique, thank you so much for having this conversation with Patrick Pouyanez, and we hope to see you soon to continue this debate. I'll turn to you now, Mathias. Thank you so much for being on set with us. In the previous discussion, Dominique Senequier said you have to mitigate the risk. Mathias, can you explain how it could be done?
So I think Dominique answered this question, and we just add some ideas. First of all, we need to bring the different stakeholders together, and each of them need to bring their stone to the building. First, governments, supranational entities, and regulators need to set the rules to stimulate demand. Industrial, they need to decarbonize their process. They need as well to decarbonize their supply chain. And as you know, the cost of CO2 has increased by 50% since the beginning of the year. We are only in June. And last but not least, investors like us need to foster the energy transition by investing and channeling the investments in this sector, which basically promote the energy transition. So I think I hope today will be an important milestone towards this goal. And I think we need to now leave the floor for the first panel.
Thank you so much, Mathias. And now the first round table, and it will be chaired by Secretary Muniz, 13th U.S. DOE Secretary. The speakers are as well Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director at the International Energy Agency, Klaus Bonhoff, Germany DG, Federal Ministry for Transport and Digital Infrastructure, Musabe Al-Kabi, CEO, Mubadala UAE Investments Platform, and Noé Van Hulst, Chair of IPHE. They will answer the question, what does it take for governments to create the hydrogen market? I remind you that there will be an interactive discussion after that, so please send your questions to the platform. Secretary Muniz, thank you so much for hosting this first panel. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Margot, and thanks to Ardian for holding this meeting on the role of governments and investors in advancing hydrogen as part of the energy transition to a low-carbon world. You know, we are at the midpoint between the 1992 Rio Earth Summit and the 2050 midpoint of the 21st century. 1992 was the year that many countries, including the United States, signed on to meeting the climate challenge. 2050 is the year that has elicited pledges of net zero for many countries and companies. But the first 29 years have led, frankly, to little progress when judged against the magnitude of the challenge. If I take my own country, we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions by about 10% since 2005, roughly canceling the increase from 1992 to 2005. This is unfortunately reflective of the limited progress we have made collectively in addressing the challenge that was somewhat understood decades ago, but that has come into much sharper focus with the progress of science and the realities of extreme weather as an expected consequence of global warming. The issue now really is the next 29 years, and indeed the next decade as a stepping stone to mid-century. Obviously, a dramatic change is needed for de-risking investment. Paris and COP21 was COP16 was critical. COP15, was critical for the tangible acknowledgement of responsibility by all nations. Now, Glasgow and COP21 must codify ambition, as in net zero and assistance to developing countries. First, it's clear that decarbonizing electricity is the lead horse. This is already the case. In the United States, for example, the electricity sector has decarbonized by 27% since 2005, versus the 10% economy-wide reduction. Indeed, electricity accounts for the majority of that 10%, mainly by displacing coal with natural gas and renewables, solar and wind. France has always had a low carbon electricity footprint because of its dependence on nuclear energy. For some other regions, the same is true because of hydroelectric power. The IEA has highlighted the importance of CCS. The costs of solar and wind have come down dramatically, opening up the possibility of low carbon electricity sectors in many other places, although the challenges of expensive electricity storage become more and more severe as the variable sources gain major market shares. Nevertheless, the trajectory towards low carbon electricity is clear, with multiple options, including renewables, nuclear, and CCUS on coal and natural gas power plants. Reaching net zero electricity before 2050 is a real possibility and an important goal. But zero carbon electricity, realistically, will not be enough for economy-wide net zero. Other sectors, transportation, industry, buildings, agriculture, waste management, are much more difficult to decarbonize. Electrification of these sectors obviously can take advantage of decarbonized electricity supply. We see this happening with the rapid penetration of light-duty electric vehicles as the cost of lithium batteries falls and governments provide financial incentives. However, at the root of this phenomenon is also the reality that EVs are high performance and appeal to many drivers on that basis. But the reality is that many parts of these hard to decarbonize sectors are unlikely to be practically and economically electrified. Low carbon electricity will need to be complemented by a fuel and by negative carbon technologies. Oil and natural gas largely provide the fuels today for all modes of transportation, industrial processes, agriculture, and other energy-intensive activities. Their direct use across multiple energy end-use sectors generates the greenhouse gas emissions that constitute catastrophic risk to our economy, security, environment, and way of life. All of the alternative, sustainable, scalable fuels today are challenged by cost. Innovation is needed to reduce these costs, especially in terms of what the end consumer sees as energy prices, versus more abstract notions of direct and indirect, for example, health costs. I believe it is fair to say, turning to today's subject, that hydrogen is emerging as the most likely candidate for this fuel, in quotation marks, as a complement to electricity, recognizing that technically hydrogen is an energy carrier in many instances, just like electricity. Hydrogen can be positioned as the, quotes, new natural gas, serving multiple sectors flexibly while eliminating major greenhouse gas emissions. It can be combusted cleanly and replace carbon-emitting industrial processes, such as in steel making, assuming, of course, that it can be produced and distributed at large scale without CO2 emissions, green, blue, pink, and other spectra of hydrogen production. It can also play the role of large-scale energy storage, including the seasonal storage that may be enabling for solar energy distant from the equator. The promise of hydrogen as a critical enabler of the low-carbon energy transition must now be met by the realities of building a major global industry at scale with a combination of government policy and incentives, support, and private sector capital. This is the focus of this roundtable. How is the hydrogen vision accelerated into market formation in this decade? There are many real-world complicated issues. How will global markets form? What will be the distribution needed? What is the role of national regulation of hydrogen as an energy commodity? How do national plans integrate with a global market, basically in the very early stages of development? How will innovation that lowers costs affect the scope, scale, and pace of hydrogen market development? What will be the physical modes of hydrogen trade and utilization? Hydrogen versus chemically bonded hydrogen, like ammonia? How will sufficient certainty be provided to investors? There are many more questions, but let's get into it with our distinguished panel. And first, in fact, introduce Fatih Birol, the Director General of the International Energy Agency, who will help frame the question further. Could we turn to Fatih Birol, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure for me to join you for this Ardian roundtable. Please do accept my apologies for not being with you live. It was my plan, but I was very much looking forward to join you. But in the last minute, I was called for a series of meetings in Brussels. I had to go there. My best regards to Secretary Moniz and my colleague, Mr. Noé van Hulst. The topics you are discussing today are now at the heart of the work we have at the IEA. We have all seen over the last year a proliferation of net zero pledges from different countries and companies. The level of commitment to fight climate change has never been higher. But if we take a step back, the picture becomes less encouraging. There is a huge gap, widening gap between the rhetoric and the reality. This year, we have a record number of new climate commitments, but also this year, we have a record increase of global CO2 emissions, the second largest in the history. At the IEA, we have carried out a major report on net zero by 2050. And we discuss how the world can reach a net zero, reaching those commitments. It is a race against time, not against each other. No one wins this race unless everybody finishes the race. And here we have two major broad of homeworks. One, to make the most out of the technologies we have today in the market. And the second, we have to make use of technologies which are under development and bring it to the markets, especially around 2030 and beyond. In this context, hydrogen will be critical, but we need to get it out of the starting blocks immediately. Fortunately, there are many good signs. Many governments are developing their hydrogen strategies as part of the long-term climate and energy ambitions. Some governments have set ambitious targets, such as the EU, that aims at 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer to be installed by 2030. There is a big push on hydrogen innovation coming from the United States. The Hydrogen Energy Earthshot initiative aims to cut the cost of clean hydrogen by 80% by 2030. And many countries are also making huge efforts, putting financial commitments. France, Germany, Japan, and others. One way to think of hydrogen is that is today where solar and batteries were some 10 years ago. Huge potential, but still expensive. And it is very possible that in 10 years from now, we will think of the policies and strategies that are being adopted today as those that made hydrogen finally make its jump out of the starting blocks and in the spirit tempo in the energy market. Dear colleagues, the global challenge of climate change demands global solutions, as we always say. The international community must significantly up its game to ensure all countries have access to financing they need to move forward with clean energy investment. Given the amounts required, public money cannot be the whole answer. But if it is used well, it can provide the catalyst role for much larger amounts of private capital to support clean energy transitions. Our roadmap is a global call to action, especially for those who have the wealth, resources, and expertise to make a difference, and offers priority actions that can be taken now to move things forward fast. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Fatih, for those words. As you all know, the IEA has been really very, very clear in emphasizing the enormous pace that we need to start on in this decade in order to be able to reach net zero. And with that, I want to turn to our panel. You've already heard some very brief biographies, so I won't repeat them. Let me turn directly first to Mr. Van Hulst. The IPHE that you chair aims to foster international intergovernmental cooperation on hydrogen and fuel cells with more than 20 member countries. This gives you a great overview of how different countries are thinking about their hydrogen market expansion and infrastructure needs. And the vision seems to be somewhat different, frankly, in many cases. Gray, green, blue, pink, and several other colors of hydrogen are in the mix. To what extent will molecular hydrogen be the medium versus chemically bonded hydrogen? Which sectors will be served by hydrogen in different regions of the world? And of course, there are many other questions, all of relevance to investors. So please paint us your picture of the global hydrogen market in 2030 and 2050.
Thank you very much, Secretary Moniz, and many thanks to Ardian for setting up this very important event. I think it's a great sign that the investment community is basically ready to move. So what is needed now in order for the private investors also to really come on board with this great momentum in hydrogen? I think that's what are one of the key questions. So in terms of government policies, I see, like others have already emphasized in the earlier discussion, there's a big need for, on the one hand, on the supply side, have temporary support schemes to help scale up fast the investment in clean hydrogen. And indeed, on the demand side, we definitely need very strong signals from government that create visible demand in those sectors that already have been stressed by many others, particularly the hard to decarbonize sectors, industry, heavy-duty transportation, seasonal storage, and some others. But those three are the main focus areas of what we see as described in many of the hydrogen strategies around the world. And last but not least, it's not only the supply and the demand, it's also the infrastructure. Indeed, like the CEO of Total rightly emphasized, we also need to develop timely way the infrastructure and the storage in order to transport the hydrogen from demand centers to supply. Now, let me briefly touch on a couple of key regions, because that's where, of course, we will see most of the action in the next couple of years. And I'm very much focused, Mr. Chairman, on the next 10 to 15 years, because I believe if we do not succeed in the first successful scaling up in the next 10 to 15 years, as has the IEA already pointed out in their roadmap 2050, if we do not succeed that, then we do not have a chance to reach those wonderful levels in 2050. So that's why I'm very much focused on the 10 to 15 years. So in Europe, I think we do see a very strong push from the Commission in the hydrogen strategy to develop the demand, supply, and the infrastructure. So some good news is that you, for instance, see a big push to repurpose gas pipelines for transportation of hydrogen. And that could happen, according to a plan of the infrastructure companies, in the next 10 to 15 years. We would be able to transport hydrogen produced either from renewable energy, but also from blue hydrogen, so with carbon capture and storage from gas, from demand centers to from supply, to the demand centers across Europe, from east to west, from north to south. And that's very critical. We do need to make that happen. What we also need to make happen is, of course, the first scaling up that we see happening in the ports area. So industrial ports, that's where a lot of the industry is concentrated and where a lot of logistical chains happen, ships coming in, but also trucks. Those are the first areas where the scaling up can happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And then coupled with the big push on the infrastructure, that can set up Europe for a very strong penetration of clean hydrogen in next 15 years. Now, across the world, I think the US will probably soon follow in this vein as well, with the new initiatives from the Biden administration. In Asia, we definitely see Japan and Korea moving. Japan has, of course, set up very important projects with Australia, with Brunei, with also the Middle East already, where they're starting to import clean hydrogen for industry and also for power generation. And those are the first global value chains that need a lot of support. We need to facilitate that in order to have the first global hydrogen trade happening. And we see other countries also jumping on that bandwagon, like Chile and other countries as well. Canada possibly is also eyeballing this kind of global trade in hydrogen. And I think that is very critical. And we need to support that strongly with the international community, but I'm sure we will come back to that. Let me not be too long at this very moment in time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, and we will indeed return notice to some of those questions. Let me turn now to Mr. Bonhoff. You're a member of the German government, and Germany is certainly one of the countries advocating acceleration of hydrogen's role in the energy economy. What is the vision? What steps is the government taking to accelerate hydrogen market formation, tax incentives, subsidies? As with NOAA, how is the German government seeing the multi-sectoral uses of hydrogen? What about setting standards and regulations, not just safety standards, but also those that define energy commodity markets, as is the case for natural gas? How is the private sector engaged in setting the policies, regulations, and standards? This is critically important for private investment to be unleashed at scale and at the pace that Fatih Birol indicated. Basically, what is the integrated national plan for accelerating a hydrogen plus clean electricity economy? A lot of questions. Please, Dr. Bonhoff.
Yes, Secretary Moniz, thank you very much for that broad set of questions indeed. And obviously, I would very much like to thank Ardian for setting up this meeting to have exactly that discussion. How can the various actors join forces in order to make hydrogen a reality in the energy system, but also to decarbonize industry processes? And maybe I'd start a little broader, looking at the question, why hydrogen? I mean, we have heard a lot already, but let me put it in a more political and in a more societal way. The reality of climate change has become aware to a broader public. And the role that hydrogen can play in that context, I believe, becomes more and more obvious and visible. And I think it was Fatih Birol about 2 years ago who said, well, what has changed? Renewable energy has become so cheap that we will have to find a way for a global renewable energy trading scheme. And you trade energy in forms of molecules and not in forms in terms of electrons. So this is why, coming from this broader picture, hydrogen, trading of green hydrogen will become a commodity. I'm very convinced of that specific point. Now, when it comes to implementing things, we obviously had a very critical year last year with the pandemic, but this led to the fact that a lot of public money was made available in order to take advantage of the very specific situation and to define stimulus packages in a way to really change the system that we live in order this transformation in the energy system, and mobility is part of the energy system for that matter. So a lot of public money has become available to move things forward. And I think this needs to be stressed over and over again. Technology is available. Yes, we need to scale. Yes, we need to make sure that commercialization takes place. And then in that context, it's not only about climate change, it is also about hydrogen technologies as an investment opportunity for one, but also from a government point of view, a way to provide jobs to your industry in this technology field. Looking at Germany specific, obviously, with our automotive industry, that transition to electrified drivetrains with batteries and fuel cells will need to be supported by making sure that the supply industry goes through this transformation process and is capable of, in the end, providing the technology. So you have to look at hydrogen in that integrated way, and that was specifically what we tried to do with our national hydrogen strategy that we came out with pretty much a year ago, where we looked at demand and supply. So the whole value chain producing hydrogen, and our clear target in our German strategy is to support production of green hydrogen. And then on the demand side, it is not only about individual demand, it is about the sum of the individual applications. It is about decarbonizing industry. It is about taking advantage of hydrogen in the transportation system. And yes, when we talk about hydrogen in the transportation system, we have that discussion on, well, cannot batteries do the job? Why do we need fuel cell drivetrains? No, the complexity of mobility requires the whole set of technologies. And again, we will import green molecules, so we should take advantage of them in the most efficient way, also in fuel cell drivetrains in all modes of transportation. So the German strategy really looked at the domestic opportunities, and we defined a target of 5 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity by 2030 based on renewable energies. But the overall energy demand is much higher than that, so we will need to import hydrogen. We are looking at European initiatives. We're starting these important projects of common European interest with an interesting funding scheme that we have. But we need to look at importing hydrogen, green hydrogen molecules from a global market. And in that context, it's not only about funding. It is about setting the right regulatory framework. It is about quotas, possibly, as we talk about it in sustainable aviation fuels. But it is also really a need for a legal definition of clean hydrogen. So in all that colors that we're discussing, we need to be very clear what's the product that in the end is being provided to the markets, providing, serving the sustainability goals that we all have. And maybe I'll leave it with that for now. I'm happy to talk more about funding and regulatory framework, but that shows a little bit the complexity and the motivation of the German government to heavily invest into this technology.
Well, thank you. And you raised some interesting points. One I would observe your point about the publics being more aware of climate is something that pertains as well to the United States, where we've obviously had some political turbulence on these issues. But I would just note that in the 2020 presidential election, for the first time, a major party, the winning candidate's party, clearly perceived climate change as a political winner in the debate, and that is a profound change in our state, in our country. But anyway, there's much there we'll come back to on the regulatory side. But let me turn to Mr. Al-Kabi. You obviously represent an economy that is diversifying, but remains nevertheless heavily dependent on hydrocarbon production, refining, and export. It therefore seems logical that blue hydrogen would be at the core of your national strategy. So what is the hydrogen integrated plan for a hydrocarbon-based economy in transition, namely the Emirates, with a plan based on significant exports? How do you see market and pricing formation for exported hydrogen? Mr. Al-Kabi.
Thank you, Secretary Moniz, and I would like to thank also Ardian for organizing this panel. It's a clear demonstration that energy transition is happening, and there is a lot to talk about the future and the outlook of the energy space. Before I start, let me paint a picture by giving a historical perspective about why the UAE is putting efforts in the hydrogen agenda going forward. The UAE is well known, for taking a proactive role in embracing new sources of energy. So if you look at the history of the country, we start exporting hydrocarbon back in 1962. And 1 decade later, in the 70s, we also embarked on or embraced a new energy form with liquefied natural gas. So the first LNG cargoes to be exported from the Middle East was from the UAE. That's a clear demonstration that the UAE, early in its journey, embraced new forms of energy. Then, of course, the country built a very strong economy, starting in the 80s with the emphasis on diversifying the economy with other industries and trying to rely less on hydrocarbon for future generations. In the year 2006, which is a remarkable achievement we are very proud of, the UAE took a very bold step in the energy transition. We embraced renewable energy. And at that time, we had exactly similar debate like the one we see now with the hydrogen. The UAE took a forward-looking view and decided to be part of the future. So we incorporated a renewable energy company called Masdar. And Masdar nowadays is one of the leading renewable companies globally and regionally. And later also we decided to embrace new forms of energy. That journey started almost 10 years back with building the first nuclear power, I would say, program in the region. So that program started last year, and with a vision to supply 25% of the total power requirement in the UAE from nuclear power. And going forward, that's why it's important to give this historical perspective. Going forward, we strongly believe that all sources of energy will be required to meet the growing energy demand we see now and in the foreseeable future. And I recall one famous graph by Fatih Birol that he showed all the sources of energy will be required in the future. So the conclusion at that time was no, there is no one solution fits all. We need oil, we need natural gas, we need nuclear, we need definitely additional forms of energy like the hydrogen. So now let me double click on Mubadala and what we're doing, and then double click on the hydrogen initiatives in the UAE. So in Mubadala, we, as I mentioned, we embrace this philosophy that all sources of energy will be required. So we are investing in many investments related to the energy transition. We're taking ESG very seriously, and it's part of our investment philosophy going forward. And when it comes to the hydrogen, we announced big, I would say, agreements earlier this year with the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance, bringing big players in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, ADNOC and ADQ, and working together to promote the hydrogen going forward. We believe that the hydrogen, be it blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, will see as I would say, strong growth going forward. Patrick Pouyanez earlier mentioned that he sees hydrogen and CO2, for example, providing jet fuel in the future. And to him, I can tell him this, that we're bringing the future here to Abu Dhabi. As we speak, we're forming a consortium to promote the hydrogen as a potential source to fulfill the jet fuel, I would say, demand in the future. That will make airline industry more sustainable. And it's very important for them, I think, to be part of that, ESG compliant and to be a responsible as well airlines in the future. So we're bringing future here in Abu Dhabi, and hopefully in a couple of years, we will hear good news from that program. I will stop there, and I'm sure that we will have more topics to discuss, Secretary Moniz.
Just briefly, so to clarify, are you planning a major blue hydrogen export industry?
No, what we are embarking now is one of our Abu Dhabi entities, of course, is spearheading the blue hydrogen. So we see a clear path for blue hydrogen because of the significant hydrocarbon reserve we have in the country. So that's one path we strongly believe in. The green hydrogen, consistent with the views mentioned during this panel earlier, I think we see a path for green hydrogen in the next 5 to 10 years. What we're doing with the green hydrogen is we're building something called hydrogen demonstrator plant. That demonstrator plant hopefully will become operational in the near future, in the couple of years or 3 years. We are bringing airlines industry, big manufacturers of hydrogen equipment like Siemens, and others to help accelerate that demonstration and prove that hydrogen can play a constructive role in the airline industry.
Mhm. Okay.
So our vision, if I summarize it as the UAE, it is very important that we see Abu Dhabi and UAE maintaining its leading position as a reliable and leading energy supplier. And I see a future where we can bring green hydrogen and blue hydrogen to maintain that position going forward.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let me turn back to Mr. Van Hulst. Of course, we've heard many times about the speed of the transition being very important, but some questions. First, do you see a lot of distributed production, especially for green hydrogen, while blue hydrogen perhaps evolves as a major supply in a relatively few hubs? What are the key steps that multiple countries need to take in harmony in order to de-risk private investment? Will we see a repetition of the LNG history of long-term bilateral contracts with indexed energy prices? If so, indexed to what? So basically, what's your view of how a global hydrogen market will function in the decadal and mid-century timescales?
Yes, thank you very much, Secretary Moniz. Great questions, difficult questions also. Let me try to make a couple of key points. I think we will see a combination of all of those things, what you said, like decentralized solutions as well as hubs. That will be my best guess. Obviously, green hydrogen very much also appropriate for local solutions. But definitely, I think we will see both the blue and the green hydrogen developing strongly, at least if we indeed will be successful in ramping up the demand. As we said, we need very much strong demand signals. If the demand goes up, we will need so much clean hydrogen supply that we will definitely need all of these options. Particularly in industry, the demand is incredibly big. So in terms of what we need internationally, I think what we need to do is indeed learn the lessons from LNG industry, like you already mentioned. But of course, LNG is a great example in terms of the long-term contracts and import, export, joint ventures, etc. However, it did take half a century. So I think we need to go faster. As Fatih Birol said, it's a race against time, and we need to go faster. So I would like to see clean hydrogen as a kind of a fast-forward movie of LNG. You know, we need to go much, much faster than that by being smarter. And how can we be so much smarter? I think by building global standards from the beginning. Really already now, and this is what we are trying to do a little bit in IPHE, try to find, global standards if we are going to transport the hydrogen. Like Klaus Bonhoff said, my good friend, we need to know, what is the carbon footprint of this particularly hydrogen production coming from Australia or from Chile or from the UAE. So we need to have an international agreement on the methodology. How do we calculate the carbon footprint of hydrogen production? This is what we are trying to develop in IPHE. And then on the basis of that, you can develop a certificates market that can really facilitate global trade. That's one thing. Another thing is we haven't even started looking at, we are just starting as we speak in IPHE, what are actually the trade barriers to clean hydrogen trade? If I import today hydrogen in the port of Rotterdam, which the port of Rotterdam, for instance, in the Netherlands is very much envisaging that they will become a big import hub for clean hydrogen. Well, what kind of barriers, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers do I actually face? Or how is it in Asia? How is it in the US? We don't know. So we need to, before discovering that we have all these kind of barriers, be kind of ahead of the game, try to identify those possible barriers and already tackle them head on in international agreements and in international trade talks if we happen to have these kind of barriers. So this is the kind of way that I think about these things. If we try to fast forward the global trade, try to be ahead of the game, find those possible barriers and try to tackle them before they even become a real issue. And that's what's basically would be my best guess in terms of the trading. What you were talking about, I think the good news is that the first initiatives to develop, for instance, hydrogen exchanges are underway. I know of one initiative in the Netherlands where they are already trying to be again ahead of the game and see how we can build a hydrogen exchange where all kinds of hydrogen in terms of the carbon footprint and in terms of green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, well defined, can be traded and can be indexed indeed, as you already mentioned. I think it's a little bit too early to say how they will be indexed, but obviously this will be important indeed for investors, that you can have reliable long-term contracts with price indexation. So price formation, price discovery, if you will, through exchanges will be an important point going forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That really is very, very important, as you say, the price indexation, et cetera, because as Patrick Pouyanez said earlier, since hydrogen is not a primary energy source, how this market develops is not entirely clear to me, at least. And it's good to see that we have experiments going on that can help speed that market formation. To change subjects a little bit, going to Mr. Bonhoff. We've also heard, including going back to Patrick, about the importance of further cost reduction in hydrogen, and that, of course, attaches to the innovation agenda. In 2018, Germany, together with Australia and the EC, took the important step, in my view, of adding renewable and clean hydrogen to the international innovation platform called Mission Innovation, which was established at the Paris COP. The initiative identified as a priority technology development that would accelerate the cost competitiveness of hydrogen in the energy system. It also envisioned strong synergy with 3 other Mission Innovation technology platforms: CCUS, biomass, and sunlight. So if you could, Dr. Bonhoff, bring us up to date on this important initiative and how you and the German government and the European Commission see cost reductions leading to rapid increases in hydrogen's market share of energy consumed. Also, Mission Innovation was expected to increase the opportunity for technology investors. I remember in Paris how Bill Gates represented the sector alongside national leaders. How can the public-private partnership be enhanced? What are Germany and the EC doing to help realize this partnership with private investors?
Yes, thank you very much for this very important topic of international partnership, which I believe is key. It is key in the field of innovation. And I remember when 2018 we started the Mission Innovation on hydrogen, we had a debate. Well, do we need this new partnership? And, we have structures. And the argument really was, in order to make visible what is happening, in order to facilitate exchange among different actors in the field of innovation, but also having clear commercialization targets in mind, I think it was the right way to implement this Mission Innovation on hydrogen. And in the end, thanks to the European Commission, also they came up then with what was called the Hydrogen Valley Platform, which is a nice summary of global initiatives that are ongoing already. Years ago, more in the field of innovation and demonstration, but as we speak, we more and more move towards the markets. And if we talk about public-private partnerships, beyond those on innovation and beyond the more policy-driven ones, like what Noé was talking about, IPHE, and the necessity to really come to a global understanding of defining a carbon footprint of different pathways for hydrogen, looking at the markets really the main cost reduction that we will see will be in scaling up. And scaling up means to create demand. And let me just, from a German perspective, talk about a public-private partnership that started as early as 2009. And Monsieur Pouyanez from Total Energy mentioned it already, H2 Mobility, where really private companies and government came together to say we have a joint target, which is a network, a hydrogen station network for fuel cell vehicles. And then this public-private initiative turned into a company that would build and operate hydrogen stations. And that's exactly the way we went through in order to get us to where we are today, based on a basic network, scale up, have the operational experience of hydrogen stations and all the bits and pieces around it, including safety, regulation codes and standards and so forth. So this, I believe, is a good example of what started as a public-private partnership, which now moves more into the commercial space, especially when we talk about expanding the network also for heavy duty and beyond Germany, obviously, to make sure that we get a truly trans-European hydrogen mobility. Another one that I think is worth mentioning is a very new one from our friends and colleagues from our Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy here within the German government. It's called H2 Global. The situation that we have is that we want to produce hydrogen, low carbon, and we know that the cost of producing that hydrogen is too high for the markets that we now can initially supply that hydrogen to. So in between, kind of like a trading platform, H2 Global is set up as a foundation with private investors and private companies being members. And this foundation is tendering the production of hydrogen at a defined cost. And then at the same time, they're saying to the markets, here is the amount of hydrogen that I will have available, and whatever they will get in return on selling that hydrogen will be lower on what they have to pay to produce the hydrogen. And this is offset by public money. So we can use public money to offset this delta cost in the beginning, or, speaking more about the investor scene, to possibly de-risk this scaling up of markets. So this, I think, is a nice example of how public-private partnerships can play a very important role in order to create the markets and to scale up.
To be specific, Patrick Pouyanez, I think, mentioned hydrogen cost today 5 to 10 times that of natural gas. And I think also it's worth reminding people that often the price per kilogram of hydrogen is stated, but of course it's about roughly 8 kilograms for a million BTU in terms of the comparison to gas prices. So do you want to speculate in terms of how, with scaling, how those prices will converge, say, in this decade or not?
Well, I'm not sure I have to speculate a lot, because you can do the math and
Right.
take figures that are available. And IEA did a great job in collecting those global figures, and other initiatives such as the Hydrogen Council has looked at the business cases around hydrogen. Producing hydrogen based on renewable energies today at scale is possible with as low as, say, €2 per kilogram of hydrogen in only certain regions. But those certain regions do exist. And those regions, I'm very sure, will find a way to offer that hydrogen to a global market. And yes, you have to add some transportation cost and these kind of things. But I truly believe that well below 4 or 5 euros per kilogram of hydrogen pretty soon makes it attractive to start with markets like transportation. I mean, transportation would be very competitive at those prices. And then further scale up would lead to prices even below 2 euros per kilogram, which then is needed for decarbonizing steel industry, chemical industry, and others. So it's, various markets, various price targets, but this is a complete narrative you have to have in mind as an integrated system.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with you. It's what you might call the high value applications in transportation and industry, where I think the cost barriers will come down the fastest. Yeah, thank you. Let me go back to Mr. Al-Kabi and really drawing upon your role in Mubadala, sorry, and obviously a major investment vehicle in clean energy. So I'd be curious as to how, from the investor point of view, you see structuring a global hydrogen portfolio for investors. Do you see investment funds supporting what might be called a hydrogen belt and road that extends the hydrogen supply chain across the industrialized and developing economies? And what more do the industrialized country governments need to do to lower investment risk, in your view?
Thank you. To start with, as an institution, we have a deep conviction when it comes to the energy transition. So I mentioned earlier our views on the renewable energy started back in 2005, 2006. So going forward, we maintain similar view and forward-looking view that energy transition is going to play a major role going forward, driven by government policies, decarbonization, climate change, ESG consideration. So we have that strong view of the future. So as a responsible investor, we are committed to invest in this trend going forward. Let me give you a few examples. One of our core values we believe in is partnership, of course. So we've built this institution based on a partnership. And when it comes to the energy transition, we have, as I mentioned earlier, signed major agreements with Abu Dhabi entities to push the hydrogen agenda going forward. We believe that the current energy mix in the UAE is unique. You have nuclear, natural gas, and renewable energy. Renewable energy will take a bigger share going forward. So that provides the UAE with a unique proposition when it comes to making more efficient system and try to utilize and capitalize on hydrogen production going forward. We do have also partnerships and trying to promote these partnerships with key hydrogen players like Siemens. We announced already 2 agreements, one with Mubadala and one with Masdar, and we're progressing on these agreements. So you mentioned road and belt or belt and road concept. So one example I can share with the audience is we announced also recently a big fund between UK and the UAE. And that fund is a multi-billion-dollar fund. And that fund will focus on 2 key sectors, life sciences and energy transition and clean, or renewable energy. So to start with, Masdar and Mubadala is already well established in UK through our big projects in the wind and in that particular geography. We think there is a room to do more. So that's one example that, yes, we're going to build partnerships with like-minded countries, like-minded businesses, and try to promote the agenda of hydrogen going forward. But it will require also, I think the journey is going to take some time because we need more government incentives, we need more government policies, and I am confident that these will come because of, as I mentioned, the decarbonization and climate change targets. So the ecosystem is about to, I would say, grow, and it can capitalize definitely on existing infrastructure, which makes also hydrogen uniquely positioned in the existing infrastructure of natural gas, be it in Europe, North America, or the Middle East, or Asia. And I can give you an example in the UAE. We have a vision where we see traditional industries like steel or aluminum producers can take advantage of the hydrogen in the future. For example, decarbonizing these industries and making them more or move them from carbon intensive to a low carbon intensive industries. One interesting example I can share also with the audience that earlier this year, Emirates Global Aluminum, one of the leading aluminum producers globally, announced a green deal with a power supplier here in the UAE. And that qualified them to produce a certain production of what we call solar aluminum. It's unbelievable how many customers around the world were reaching out to us to get access to the solar aluminum. That's a trend. We see it already today, and I'm sure and I'm confident that that trend will accelerate in the future. So we have in the UAE a collective responsibility to ensure that our existing industries are competitive in the energy transition environment and future we see in the near future. So yes, I think there is a way and there is a path, and that path is very clear to us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. I wish we had more time, but I think we've painted a picture of some really major challenges, although with a pathway to addressing them in terms of providing regulatory structures, the international infrastructure, et cetera, which I hope is going to be a major conversation on the road to Glasgow in November, so that the kinds of international collaboration to see hydrogen market formation go ahead will be realized. And with that, again, thank you for these insights, and I'm going to turn it back to Margot.
So much, Secretary Muniz, for hosting this conversation, and thank you to all our speakers for taking some of their precious time to be here with us on this summit. We are delighted to welcome Fabio Ferrari on set, operating partner of Ardian and founder of the hydrogen fuel cell company Symbio. You're on set with us to answer some of the questions from the audience, but let me turn now to Mathias. Why is Ardian hosting this conference now?
Well, Margot, actually this is the third of a series of conferences we're organizing on infrastructure and climate. And as was mentioned by Dr. Fatih Birol, hydrogen is a key technology for climate change, to fight climate change. And as he mentioned, we cannot wait. We need to do it now. So it was important to do this year conference focusing on hydrogen. Our role also is to bring the attention of our investor, to the largest investor all over the world, to this crucial sector, which will make a big difference to fight climate change.
And why are regulatory frameworks so important for infrastructure, Mathias?
Well, infrastructure is about long-term investments in companies or infrastructures which are providing essential service to community. So our role is to bring to this crucial sector for each country the best cost of capital, the best efficient cost of capital, and for that we need visibility and stability of the regulation. The second thing is that as it provides essential services, the role of the regulator is to basically make sure that the end user gets the best value for money, and the private sector don't take undue I would say profit derived from their monopolistic situation. So the role of regulators are key, and at Ardian we really aim to have a very constructive dialogue with regulators to make this win-win situation happen.
So the IEA road, as explained by Dr. Fatih Birol, shows that there is a way to reach zero carbon economy in 2050, and hydrogen plays, of course, a major role in this scenario. Tell me about your viewpoint from Ardian dealing with companies innovating this. How will hydrogen impact renewable energy production development, Mathias?
Well, as you know, we are a large producer of renewable energy, and for us, we see really the hydrogen as a way to even improve the impact of renewable energy and to obviously develop our renewable and increase the value of our renewable energy platforms. Today, and to reach the objective of the net zero carbon emissions, we need to invest 1,000 gigawatts every year. Today, we are investing 250, so we need to multiply by 4 this capacity. which means that we will face some constraints. In particular, renewable hydrogen will enable us to solve those issues. The first one is that the renewable energy are great, but they are intermittent, so we need to store them. The second element is our grid are what they are. We cannot multiply by 2, by 3, or by 4 those electricity grid. So I was mentioned before, the hydrogen will enable to store over long term, summer to winter, for example, and much efficiently for large volumes and large scale than batteries can do. And the second element is that we also can transform this energy into molecules rather than electrons. So that's obviously address the issue of the grid. So that's why hydrogen we see as well as a way to increase the value and the potential and the benefit we can have from our renewable energy platforms.
Thank you so much, Mathias. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions from the platform. And the first question is actually for you, Fabio. We have a question saying, can you elaborate how mature the technology is for hydrogen?
Well, the technology is quite mature. If we start from production side, of course, we have been talking about producing hydrogen from natural gas, and the industry have been doing that for decades. So it's a very mature technology. Now, when we are now trying to expand the capacity to produce this hydrogen using electricity and renewable electricity, of course, and in this case, it will be electrolyzers, and we are now designing specific electrolyzer to produce this hydrogen, but the technology has been developed here also for decades to produce chlorine. So it's an old technology that is only adapted to produce only hydrogen and not chlorine. So that's for production. For the mobility, for example, the fuel cells, the other part, when you use this hydrogen to produce electricity into a vehicle, in this case, the technology has been developed for, let's say, about 20 years now. We'll discuss a little bit about that later. But so the technology is really mature. Now we have everything that is available in terms of technology and ready to be produced.
Thank you, Fabio. And the second question is coming as well from the platform, and it's for Mathias. Is hydrogen a profitable energy source for private investors?
That's the question that we need to answer. I think as was mentioned by Patrick Pouyanez, is a chicken and egg question, actually, because what will make successful this industry is to be able to reduce the cost of capital for hydrogen. That's our role, to bring the best investor for this essential, I would say, project for all the world. And for that, regulation will be key. But in any case, in the next panel, which will gather, leaders of companies dealing with hydrogen, energy, and transport, they can be more specific than myself on this topic.
Thank you, Mathias. And actually, can you give us an example on how hydrogen will impact our everyday life? It's not as simple for everyone in the audience.
But still, it will impact. Well, let's take the example maybe of the transport sector. Transport sector represents more or less 30% of the energy consumptions. So we have today already trucks and public transport using hydrogen. Tomorrow, private cars will be using fuel cells, as was mentioned before. And tomorrow also there will be planes, and I think there has been a recent announcement by Airbus, Air Liquide, and EDP to make the first airplane using hydrogen. That will be in 2035.
Thank you. That's very interesting announcement, Mathias. And speaking about trucks and cars, we have someone here who can really dig into that topic. We're proud to be joined today by Dr. Se-Hoon Kim, Executive Vice President, Fuel Cell Center, Hyundai Motor Group, and Fabio Ferrari, who joined us earlier, operating partner of Ardian and founder of the hydrogen fuel cell company Symbio, to talk more about the future of mobility and hydrogen-powered cars. Fabio, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Saoun. I'm so happy to have you today joining this Hydrogen Summit to talk about mobility. You've done some so incredible things in Hyundai, but please start by saying who you are and what you've done in Hyundai.
Yeah, Fabio, it's nice to meet you again. We saw in Paris Motor Show in the past, and we saw your Symbio fuel cell car. I started my career in Hyundai Motor Company in 2003 as a stack engineer, and now I'm a senior vice president, and I'm in charge of fuel cell development and also fuel cell business. So I've been working in this business for about 18 years, I think.
Yes, I remember the first time we met. It was in the Paris Motor Show in 2012. You were having a huge booth to show the very first hydrogen car available on the market, not a prototype, something that people can buy. And we were showing our first Kangoo, hydrogen Kangoo from Renault. It was incredible. But maybe just to people that doesn't know what is a hydrogen car, can you explain how it works?
Yeah, so when we started hydrogen fuel cell car development, it was really difficult to get the components. It was all very expensive. Every component was $20,000, I remember. Now we had mass production in 2013 with our Tucson, and then in 2018 with our Nexo fuel cell vehicle. I think Nexo is already, we deployed more than 10,000 units in the market. And as the suppliers is increasing, as a number of suppliers increase, there is more competition, and the cost of the components are coming down very rapidly. I think this trend will go for quite a long time because we did not reach the mass production cost yet. But I'm sure that when we have sufficient infrastructure, I think we can come down and compete with battery electric vehicles first. Then we can maybe go for competing with internal combustion engine vehicles. Well, everyone, I think many people knows about the battery vehicles, but fuel cell vehicles, normal public people doesn't know about it. So if I explain a little bit about that, fuel cell, is just an opposite reaction of electrolysis. So in the school time, we have learned that when we put electricity in the water and there is an anode cathode, then we can create with electricity and water, hydrogen and oxygen. Fuel cell is just opposite reaction. So we put hydrogen as a fuel and oxygen from the air, we put together in a device called fuel cell. Then there's a electrochemical process and create electricity and water. And we are using this electricity to run the vehicles. So actually, basically, fuel cell vehicle is also an electric vehicle. Battery also an electric vehicle, only where you get the electricity from the battery or fuel cell. That's only the difference, I think.
Yes, and if I may add a comment, the two main elements that you put on top of an electric vehicles to make a fuel cell vehicles are the tanks where you store the hydrogen and the fuel cells that will produce the electricity on board. And putting this, sharing these two elements by different car manufacturers will, of course, reduce the price. This is, for example, something that we are doing in Symbio. Symbio is selling fuel cells to different car manufacturers, for example, Stellantis. And we know in the car industry that grouping production to create these gigafactories that we know for batteries, we can do exactly the same thing for fuel cell, will bring the price down. And of course, you and me, we know that an hydrogen car can be very competitive compared to a diesel one. But maybe to come back to something that could be interesting for everybody, how do you refill an hydrogen car?
Well, we can refuel the hydrogen tank within 3 minutes. So you will not have a difference compared to ICE engines. But we have problem with infrastructure. So when we Tucson fuel cell vehicle was first launched, I just counted hydrogen stations. the number of hydrogen stations in each country, because we could only sell our cars where the station is. Yeah. And in the early days, the station was experimental stations. So the capacity of the stations, they could only charge about 30 vehicles per day. But we know that if you want to make a business case, you have to refuel about 200 vehicles per day. Now I see in Korea increasing capacity per station. It's going in the right way. And I think, Korea has a goal to build 310 stations till 2023, I think. And I think it will go. So now we have less problem. Country by country situation is different. For example, in Germany, there is more, I think almost 100 stations, but there have not many cars. No. In Korea, we have only 70 stations, but more than 10,000 vehicles running. Maybe in Japan, it is more balanced. So important thing is that we balance the demand and supply of the hydrogen. Now I see a lot of, the situation has really changed since the hydrogen strategy announcement of Europe and Germany. Now we don't ask about whether hydrogen economy will come or not, because it is really, it is really true that it will come. If we use only renewable and we want to use this renewable in the right way, we have to combine with hydrogen. Yeah. And the point that I see as a problem, or what we have to balance good, is that internationally, globally, there will be unmatched in the hydrogen production and the hydrogen demand, which uses hydrogen. So I think what Symbio and Hyundai, fuel cell developing companies, has to do is we have to increase the application area, that more and more hydrogen can be used in the everyday life. Now in Korea, there is many energy companies who announce that they will involve in the hydrogen economy and they'll supply hydrogen. But the problem is they cannot find the big demand of hydrogen. Yeah. So that will be another problem, like chicken and egg. So I think the countries, nations will have to balance it very well. Yeah.
Yes, it's a complete value chain that we have to build all together and simultaneously. But you said that there was a chicken and egg problem, and you know that I love the captive fleet approach to solve this chicken and egg problem. And you've made something very interesting in Switzerland, an approach to solve this chicken and egg problem. Can you explain a little bit what you've done in Switzerland?
Switzerland, we have supplied already 46 trucks, and I think this year we'll supply 140 trucks more. Mm-hmm. I was quite afraid about this truck application with fuel cell, because our fuel cell, we put two systems, two 85 kilowatt system, and in total it is only 170 kilowatts. So normal diesel trucks of class 8 has about 350 kilowatt power. So it is only half, but thanks to the battery, we can work as a hybrid truck, and fortunately the drivers doesn't feel any deficit in the power. They're very satisfied with the performance, and Switzerland, there is a lot of upstream upwards, like you have to climb the mountains, about 1,500 meter high, but it works. And economically, why it works in Switzerland is because of their tax system. Because in Switzerland, when you drive a diesel truck of class 8, you have to pay, I think, about 70 Swiss cents. So it's almost $1, yeah? So if you go 1 million kilometer, $1 million is the tax benefit. Yeah. So $1 million is more cheaper than the truck cost itself. Yeah. So that is why, policy is very important, tax policy. So we have talked about green premium. So, Bill Gates also talked about green premium. It's very high, but we have to narrow it. We have to narrow it by developing technology and, coming to the mass production phase. But I think policy can solve that problem more earlier. Yeah, that it naturally happens. And we need it right now because we don't have time.
Yes, I totally agree. We have to set up the right policy now if we want to reach 2050 targets. This is the only solution. I don't know it will be taxes or incentives. We have to decide what will be the best solution. But for example, for the truck driver, the TCO has to be the same compared to diesel. What I mean by TCO is the price per kilo or the price per kilometer that we will pay to transport goods. And this is the case in Switzerland, as you say, with this choice of taxes. And once again, this captive fleet approach is deploying simultaneously the infrastructure, the hydrogen production, and of course trucks. And that's the best solution to demonstrate that at the business point of view it works, and at the technical point of view it works, as you said, with the trucks that you've developed. So once again, it's a very nice solution that you've developed.
Yeah. So I think subsidy is quite limited. Yeah. So I don't like to achieve subsidy, because it is like getting help from others. But like CO2 tax can solve this problem. If we count the CO2 cost, then is it really cheap or expensive? So I think I know that there is a lot of discussions going on with the CO2 tax and CO2 costs, and if we really want to achieve, carbon neutral or even minus, I think this kind of, valuing the CO2 is very important. And we have to try to we have to lower the, zero emission vehicle cost, but at the same way, we have to revalue the existing polluting technology and make it at the same value. Then we can compete. Yeah, and I think the mission of the politicians is very important for that.
Yes, and you know that in France, when we are talking about taxes on CO2, it generates some problems. Maybe you have heard about the Gilets jaunes, the problems that we had before the COVID. So this is why I propose to choose the best solution between subsidies and taxes. But at the end of the day, it is the job of the government to choose what will be the best policy to put in place. And I think it's an excellent conclusion. We've demonstrated that hydrogen mobility is something concrete, it works. The only thing that we have to set up now is this right policy, this right way to help to deploy this technology. Thank you very much, Seihun, for your time on this interview. It was very interesting, and I hope that everybody understood that this is a good solution and it's complementary to batteries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very great conversation and very interesting. Thank you so much to Dr. Seihun Kim, Executive Vice President, Fuel Cell Center, Hyundai Motor Group, and Fabio Ferrari for being on set and asking all the questions. You are the operating partner of Ardian and founder of the hydrogen fuel cell company Symbio. Mathias, let's dive into this topic for Ardian. What has driven Ardian's involvement in hydrogen?
Well, I was mentioned by Dominique, energy transition is key to us. We are very committed to energy transition. First, because I think it's all of us responsibility to contribute to energy transition and to fight climate change. And second, because as an investor, we realize that the most efficient companies are the ones, and I'm talking also by creating more value, are the ones which are more carbon efficient. So there is a virtuous circle to that. The second is that, as was mentioned before, there will be massive investment and business opportunity required to meet the net zero carbon targets in the hydrogen industry. And we want to replicate the success we had in renewable energies on the hydrogen. And so that's for us an absolute priority from this point of view.
What about what Fatih Birol said? just before?
Yes, basically, we can estimate that the hydrogen industry is almost like renewable energy, solar PVs and wind farms 10 or 15 years ago. So you can realize the massive opportunity of investments that will be there for first mover for hydrogen.
A good thing for Ardian's clients too.
Absolutely. If we manage all together with industrial, with a regulator to make this industry take off and rather sooner rather than later, which requires again collaboration between all the stakeholders.
And how you envision your first investments?
Well, I think we have the chance to be a significant investor in the whole value chain of infrastructure. So obviously on energy, on midstream, and also on downstream on transport. So I think the first investment will be done through the companies where we invest in. So we will, for example, we have a partnership with Adowea, the Italian utility,
right,
which we signed a few months ago to build and to generate hydrogen from our renewable energy plants in Italy. That's a first good example. And another example is EWE, which is one of the leading German utilities in Lower Saxony, which has different projects from covering the different segments of the value chain of hydrogen, from upstream with electrolyzer, with storage capacity, but also to fuel a refueling station for hydrogen. So our role is to support and to help them, I would say, moving fast, because time is of essence. The other thing is important to really help this and to contribute to this. We realized that we need a dedicated task force focusing on hydrogen. So within Ardian infrastructure, we decided to create a specific task force focusing on hydrogen with the expertise, for example, of Fabio Ferrari, and Amir Sharifi will be the leader of this task force.
But really, why has hydrogen recently gained so much momentum?
I think it's very positive how the consciousness of environmental urgency has developed. Even with I would say COVID crisis, it's even accelerate. We could think, well, people will be maybe focused more on their short-term issue, but to the contrary, that has provoked, for example, as well this very significant increase in the price of carbon, and this the countries, the authorities in the different countries and the industry have realized that if they need to be the first mover, Europe has realized, China has realized, Middle East has realized, and also the US has realized that the first mover in hydrogen will have a competitive advantage for their industry if they move fast. So we are talking about significant amount of money to be invested. We are talking about, I think, I was mentioned with the International Energy Agency, $1.7 trillion to be invested, and this is we need
by 2030.
By 2030, absolutely sorry. But we have to build a new sector, a new market from scratch. So that's why collaboration is key, regulation is key, if we want to attract cost-effective capitals to fuel all this industry.
And speaking about investment, Mathias, is hydrogen an asset class per se?
I think not yet, but it will soon be the case. Soon, I think it's really a matter of years, if not months, and that's why we have dedicated this specific task force to be in a position to be a first mover in this industry.
So you have, do you have any concrete plans, let's say, or concrete examples of your portfolio companies already involved in hydrogen projects?
Yes, actually, I was surprised and very proud and very supportive of the companies we invest, how fast they have developed the project for hydrogen, very critical projects. They will have the opportunity in the next panel to expand on it. But as I mentioned, there is a renewable energy platform collaborating with utilities to develop electrolyzer and clean hydrogen. There is also in Germany the different segment elements of the hydrogen that will be tackled with EWE. And also in France, we have a very interesting project by converting an infrastructure which is today devoted to hydrocarbon and the storage of hydrocarbon, these saline caverns, that we are planning to transform little by little to store hydrogen and to produce also hydrogen with solar panels. So, but that's an incredible project. But I will let the leaders of the next panel to expand on it.
Thank you so much, Mathias. And let's talk indeed about Ardian's portfolio companies and industrial partners now in the next roundtable. Amir Sharifi, Managing Director, Energy Transition Lead. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amir Sharifi, Managing Director in charge of energy transition with Ardian. I'm really honored to chair this important part of the summit as we hear views and insights from some of the most important players in industry. My responsibility within Ardian is to deploy commitments on behalf of pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds into profitable and sustainable projects. During the session we're going to have now, we are going to present some of the current notable hydrogen projects. We're going to assess them, we're going to discuss them. And we're also going to look at the wider opportunity, both for now and for the future. Together, in this panel, our aim is to find out what needs to be done to open the hydrogen market to private capital. We will discuss the real industrial projects and debate whether they have what it takes to be investable. At Ardian, hydrogen is already an important area for us. Dominique Senequier mentioned it. Mathias also highlighted the point. To date, we are working with 10 different companies on active hydrogen projects, which represent roughly 1 billion of capex. The timeliness is really clear. Every day, we read about the importance of hydrogen in the newspapers and online, and we see many hydrogen initiatives that are being announced each week. We are increasingly witnessing roughly 1 billion worth of new projects in this field. So, the question is, can we confidently invest in hydrogen projects today? Is it too soon because the technology is not refined enough? Is the investment case still too nascent? What are the conditions required so that it will work for now and the years to come? Today, our panel of experts have joined us for this roundtable to help us explore these questions and hopefully provide guidance on what is needed to cultivate innovation and investments in this space. Maybe we can start with someone that is probably the one that has the most transversal vision of what is going on in terms of hydrogen projects emerging in the industrial landscape. I am very pleased to welcome Daryl Wilson, the Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council. Daryl, I put a figure in my introduction, 1 billion worth of projects every week. Does this sound right to you? Could you give us an overview of the hydrogen business landscape in terms of amounts, geographies, types of projects?
Sure. Thank you, Amir. Indeed, we are seeing that kind of growth and more. And I think this speaks very much to the real momentum in the sector. It starts a virtual cycle where costs are driven down. In the earlier parts of the presentation, many comments about hydrogen being expensive. That's always the case when a new entrant attacks the incumbents and starts to displace them. We start from a higher cost position, but the large scale of investment now, I think, is speaking to tremendous momentum, which will continuously now drive costs down. I'd like to share a few slides today in the presentation to help you get some global perspective from the Hydrogen Council. Next slide, please. The Council was formed in 2017 and now brings together more than 110 industrial players, leading multinationals in the transport industry, such as Hyundai that you heard from earlier, and Toyota, and then across the energy sector, such as Total and BP and Shell, and then on through the energy innovators in hydrogen, our supporting members who have brought this technology over a long haul of 10, 20 years of development. Those days are behind us, and now hydrogen is moving mainstream to large-scale projects. Next slide, please. Policy is very important. We've heard from a number of government officials, and they've very capably shown you the momentum on their side. Today, the leaders are France, Germany, the European Union, very strong policy initiatives there, as well as China, Korea, and Japan. This is where we find well-developed strategy supported by funding and targets for a shared national approach to the deployment of hydrogen. In fact, there is no solution to our climate problem without hydrogen. Molecules have been such a critical part of our energy equation for so long. We do need a new molecule, and that molecule is kind of the last stop on a long journey. But we're early in this phase, and so we raise the caution as we talk about policy to be a little careful. Let's not call the game too early and over-prescribe and over-regulate this particular sector. As we've seen with the development of the internet or mobile devices, it takes a time for the early phases of that exponential climb to start to take hold. And sometimes it's not obvious right at the beginning who the winners are going to be. But we now have indeed entered that important phase. Let's look at the next slide and the scale of the government commitments, billions of dollars. You can see the numbers for France and Germany at in the range of 9 to 11 billion euros in support of hydrogen policy specifically, and other countries are following as well. The strongest policy area developments reflect both the support of the upstream supply side and the downstream demand side. And we've had several comments in the earlier discussions touching on the importance of that integrative total energy system approach. Next slide. When we look at the various applications, and indeed it can become quite confusing, there are many applications. We're tracking more than 35 hydrogen applications with our knowledge partner McKinsey on the council. And we stratified those according to this matrix, going top to bottom. Those applications which are more competitive with green or sustainable solutions, and left to right, those applications which are more competitive with conventional applications. And so the sweet spot on the chart, of course, is in the top right-hand corner. That's the best place to begin. And so we populate this chart on the next slide with some detail to depict where are those opportunities where the business models have a level of maturity and competitiveness, both from a sustainability point of view, as well as from an economic competition with incumbents point of view. And there we find an interesting mix of the hard to decarbonize sectors like ammonia fertilizer production and steel production. And the first projects in the scale of hundreds of millions through to billions of dollars are actually showing up in these particular areas where we can decarbonize our process industries, which indeed require a lot of chemical hydrogen input. And then the transport sector is also very important. And this is a place where there's some tendency to call the game a bit early and not fully understand how to evaluate hydrogen in transport. Sometimes we're drawn into comparing vehicles and vehicle efficiencies, but actually, as you heard already from all of the other sessions, this is a discussion about our whole energy system. And when we pull back the lens and look at the entire energy system in supporting the movement of goods and heavy transport, we start to understand why hydrogen is a very critical molecule to bring to vehicles sufficient energy and to be able to refuel sufficiently quickly so that we can keep our goods moving to where we want them to be. And so a very, very important part of the solutions in transport for climate change lie with hydrogen. And that's why you're seeing the discussion already on the panel previously around an approach to fleets and fleets of trucks in particular. Next, if we take all of these projects and sum them together, we've been tracking with our knowledge partner, McKinsey, the evolution of announced projects at a megawatt scale and above around the globe. Now, I quickly contrast, for some of you that are in Europe, you've been hearing about 1,000 hydrogen projects coordinated by the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, supported by the Commission. Those projects are proposals today. They are not at the level of maturity of the projects that I'm depicting here on this slide. And so, again, you get that sense of momentum to this large portfolio of established projects which have been announced and have funding support is a flood of additional project proposals announced in Europe just in the recent weeks. You can see some patterns starting to emerge. So large-scale industrial usage, those applications where carbon-intensive industries are trying to support the rapid decarbonization of their process. These are dominating, as well as transport projects. You can see that Europe has a very heavy concentration due to the policy signals that have been sent from there, but also we're seeing Australia with very strong renewable energy resources, and China and Korea and Japan also very active. Now, when we put numbers to this on the next slide, you get a shocking realization. We're not just starting, we're well underway. The total value of all of these projects that we were tracking in January exceeded $340 billion US dollars. And out of that, 80 billion would be at a mature stage where they're post-investment decision and moving into hard industrial planning. There's 70 billion of public money behind these projects. Now, this was the view that we had in January of this year. Very shortly, we'll release the next update from the Hydrogen Council, and I can tell you, without giving you the actual numbers, that we have seen a stunning jump of projects. And this was not just a matter of poorly tracking the first round. Actually, more projects have been announced and established in the very short time since we last published these numbers. And if you set this against the background of the entire industry at some 200 billion US dollars globally, this means that the industry will triple between now and 2030. So the momentum is plain. Turning to the last slide, it's important to understand that critical price and cost signals are moving substantially. And this, of course, is the time to catch the investment. These signals are not moving in a level way around the world. Certain geographies favored by high renewable energy resources are moving more quickly to low cost levels. But I think it's indeed a fascinating time to be an investor in this sector. This is real. This is large. It's scaling quickly. And of course, there's a need for navigation to find those investments which have the robust support around them and the business case behind them. And I think Ardian represents a great partner to help investors navigate to those projects, which will be indeed fruitful investment for many years to come. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Daryl, for this eye-opening presentation. Let me summarize maybe what are key takeaways for me on what you've just explained. So first, I noted that we need a systematic approach to this in terms of both the upstream side and downstream side of the projects. Second, the projects need to be large, and you have identified actually 35 different applications for different projects. And the best place to begin are on one side, the hard to decarbonate industries like the steel, for instance, and also on the transportation side, using the fleets for the trucks in particular, are the places where you probably have more opportunities to begin. And at a global scale, if we look at the figures, 80 billion of projects already mature for investment, of which 40 billion are post-investment stage. So very interesting takeaways. Thanks a lot for your introduction, Daryl. And now let's move from the macro to the micro. Let's discuss with our industrial partners who have come today armed with expertise, experience, and know-how of the hydrogen space. Buongiorno, Ingegnere Masoncini. You are the CEO. Buongiorno.
Good afternoon to everyone.
You are the CEO of Adua Group, the largest Italian multi-utility. A few weeks ago, our companies signed a non-binding term sheet for a partnership to accelerate the energy transition. Through this partnership, Adua and Ardian are aiming to establish the second largest Italian platform focused on energy transition. It will also be one of the largest electricity producers and suppliers in Italy, with a clear decarbonization strategy in line with the objectives set by the Italian Energy and Climate Plan and as well as the Paris Agreement. So, in a nutshell, it is a fantastic project and we're really proud to be working on this with you. It has on top of it all its roots in hydrogen. So, I think maybe we could say that the genesis of this partnership has actually started at the end of last year when we established and started to announce a partnership around a green hydrogen project where we would combine our forces. On our side, we have some production assets of renewables in south of Italy, and we saw that it was a synergy between our two groups. And so therefore, I would like to ask you maybe one question to initiate our discussion. Do you consider hydrogen to have a key role to play in a company like yours for its long-term sustainability?
Okay, Amir, let's say that it's a pleasure also for me to be here with you. Surely sustainability is, let's say, the North Star of our new industrial plan. We deployed the new 10 years industrial plan, 21-30, in January. And to understand, we expected to save about 30 million tons of CO2 during our industrial plan. But to have an idea, is the total CO2 emitted by all the freight transport by trucks in Italy in 1 year. So only to say that the materiality of this reduction of CO2 is very important. And for us, the core activities, as you said, is energy generation. We are the second player in Italy in this moment. Energy distribution, both gas and electricity. We are the second player. And let's say also recollection and management of all the process related to waste, including waste to energy. So it's clear that the agreement with Ardian is very important for us, in particular to develop quickly the renewable world. That is very important also in Italy. I remember that in Italy we have to realize 65 gigawatt of new renewables, so solar and wind in the next decades. So there is a lot of work to do. And surely hydrogen vector is very important, like for the potential contribute for decarbonization. And let's say we are a multi-utility company, so we are a company that works both with electron and molecular. And this is very important, in my opinion, because if we look to the total decarbonized world in 2050, all the forecast says that the world will be 55% about electron, 45% molecular. But the sustainable molecular will be biogas, so biomethane, biogas, syngas, and hydrogen. And the forecast of the full penetration, the final penetration in 2050 in Europe of hydrogen, as you probably know, is about 14%. In Italy can be also 20%. So the problem is that we have to push the demand, but we have also to transform the actual production in grey hydrogen, because in Italy in this moment 99% is grey, so from steel reforming from methane, to green hydrogen. And so we are working for this target. And this is the reason for why in our industrial plan we introduced the development of, let's say, 300 megawatt of electrolyzer by 2030. But why this is not very challenging for us? Because we have really to study, to do research, and to understand better how is possible, let's say, also to extract EBITDA from hydrogen, sustainability, but also EBITDA. And in this moment, there is a very interesting cooperation between different companies in our country, exactly to understand how it's possible to manage this opportunity of hydrogen for the future, also with satisfaction from a financial point of view.
Thank you. That's really eye-opening, and thank you for your comments. Maybe you touched upon a key point, which is the importance to push demand. If we link this point of demand with the question of the regulatory framework, what kind of regulatory framework would you see required to unlock hydrogen projects in Italy?
Yeah, I think not only in Italy, but I think that in Europe we have to do a lot from a regulatory framework. Something, for example, first, clearly define the classification of hydrogen, because in my personal opinion, is essential to introduce the concept of clean hydrogen, as hydrogen produced with zero emissions, so carbon-free plant. For example, in my opinion, it's possible to produce clean hydrogen from waste-to-energy plant, because there are a part in Italy is classified about 50% of the waste-to-energy plant are clean. So we have not to consider green hydrogen only if is added. So and not only from photovoltaic or wind plant, because there are other opportunities. The second is the evolution of self-consumption configuration, because is necessary but not sufficient condition for the development of hydrogen supply chain is the tariff exemption for the electricity consumed by electrolyzer, because the electricity consumed by electrolyzer is consumed not for a final use, but for produce a second energy, that is hydrogen. And so I think that is very important to give the possibility not to pay all the additional cost that we have in Italy. In Italy, about 70% of the cost of energy is not the cost of the electron, but the cost of distribution, tax, and so on. And that is correct to pay for electricity for final use, but not for to produce hydrogen, that is a secondary form of energy. The third is the guarantees of origin, because it's necessary to implement a new system to guarantee the origin of hydrogen. For example, in our opinion, can be very useful to connect the production of green hydrogen to specific plant, so with PPA's agreement. Let's say, but this is a problem surely in Italy, probably not only in our countries, to simplify all the process of authorization, both for renewable new plant. We have to multiply for 4 the speed to produce a new plant in Italy to arrive to the target that we fixed in 2030, but also authorization for the plant of hydrogen production, so electrolyzer, storage, and so on. And there is not, let's say, there is not expertise in this field, of course, in our country. And I think that we need that our regulatory authorities and administrative authorities will improve quickly the competencies on hydrogen, not to lock development that are surely very, very important. And last but not least, I think that we have to incentive the hydrogen off-takers, because in this moment, for example, talking on industry, that can be a very interesting demand for hydrogen. The problem is that there are a lot of costs for the reconversion of industry, and I think that we need incentives to push the demand, exactly like happened in renewable 10 years ago.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Mr. Mazzoncini. Let's now move from Italy to Spain. and compare the perspective. Mr. Mazzoncini just touched base about the need for incentives of the offtake, and we probably can touch base on a specific case that Mr. Oreja, that is here with us now, the CEO of Enagas, will touch upon. Glad to see you again, Marcelino. You are the CEO of Enagas, the Spain's leading natural gas transmission company. I was really impressed to read that Enagas has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2040, and that renewable gases, such as hydrogen, are going to be a key role in achieving this target. So first, tell me about the steps that you have taken to make this happen. First, so maybe I think the steps are maybe the one that we can talk about is the project that we have in Mallorca. Personally, I thought that this island was known for its beaches and not really as an avant-garde place for the energy transition. So can you tell us about this project? Would be good to maybe to frame it a little bit, to use the Ardian criteria to assess it as we would do for a typical investment in hydrogen. We would look at 4 criteria. First, duration, the offtake, so in terms of duration, counterparty risk, price, of course. Second, the source of the energy and the price of that source of energy. Third, the payback time, with and without the support mechanism. And fourth, any specific risk that you could see in terms of transportation and construction. So if you could describe this project, would be really interesting for us.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's very important for us, for Enagas, to be part of this conference. For Enagas, decarbonizing is very important. So we're going to achieve it through different ways. One of it is going to be decarbonizing our chain, so substituting some of our equipment using electricity instead of gas. And on top of all of this project, I will go through the project in Mallorca. We are now participating in more than 55 different projects, 50 of them related to hydrogen, with more than 50 different partners. So I would say that all of them have to do with producing electricity, producing cheap hydrogen, or as cheap as we can, having off-takers, and it has been said during this conference. So we will try always to have a good off-taker, some of the hydrogen sold before we start, so coming to your point, and having as much as we can cheap electricity and cheap gas. Green Island in Mallorca was funded by the European Union, so this was before the COVID, and all the funds are going to come today to many of the projects. This project will allow to decarbonize the Balearic Islands, and we will try to we will produce over 300 tons of hydrogen. And we will produce it through 15 megawatts of electricity together with Acciona and Cemex. So one important thing of this project is that we're working together, a TSO and a gas company, together with Acciona, an electrical company, also with Cemex, who owns the part of the land where we're going to produce the hydrogen, together with the authorities of Mallorca and the government of Mallorca, who have supported this project from the beginning, together also with the government of Spain through one of its state-owned companies who's supporting also IDAE, who's supporting the project. So again, here we're going to produce cheap hydrogen. We're going to have an off-taker, it's going to be the municipality of Mallorca. And we are working together with local government, with the national government, and with the European Union. So public and private collaboration is very important in any of these projects coming through in the future. About the rate of returns, well, I would say that 1/3 of the hydrogen is already guaranteed, and we have a PPA signed with the municipality of Mallorca. The 2/3 are coming. The project will be finished at the end of this year, beginning of next one. So now when we listen at many of these projects, and Daryl was speaking about them, you will listen to hundreds of megawatts of hydrogen. This is going to be a real green hydrogen project coming into Spain. It's going to be the first project in the south part of Europe, producing this 300 tons around or starting beginning of next year. So public and private partnership is very important. PPA is very important, and cheap hydrogen, or cheapest as we can. And here we're going to really see the price of hydrogen coming in.
Very clear, thank you. So if I summarize your project, basically in terms of the key criteria we mentioned, you have a strong off-taker structure thanks to a public-private partnership with a PPA signed. So this is good for the structure. You have no issues with the transportation, of course. It seems you have the right incentives and to make it nice and profitable. So that looks good for business. So thanks a lot for sharing that example with us, and look forward to travel to Mallorca to visit it maybe at some point in time. Maybe
I think that's one of the nicest things of the project is having it in Mallorca. It's going to be very nice to show it. I'm happy to show you all the project, hopefully beginning of next year.
Okay, message taken for everyone who wants to travel and visit this showcase project. Thank you, Mr. Oreja. Let's move from Spain to Germany. I have the pleasure to have with us today Dr. Urban Kuysen. Urban, you're a member of the Executive Board and Chief Technical Officer of EWE, the North German energy supplier, in which Ardian is a reference shareholder. EWE is really pioneering in the sector of hydrogen and the supply of sustainable energy. Very early, you have been committed to building a hydrogen economy, and you have actually trained us as Ardian already 2 years ago in understanding that it was a major change that was going to happen. So thanks for bringing us on board of this adventure. Maybe when we prepared this, you told us about a very interesting project, which is the Clean Hydrogen Coastline. I'd like you to, like we just did with Mr. Oreja, just if you could present your project as you would do to a private investor. Again, keeping in mind the key criteria that we described, as much as you can say in terms of offtake, in terms of the source of the energy, the payback, whatever data and facts you can share with us so that we can assess those real projects, how they are really behaving in terms of an industrial perspective, but also from the investor perspective as well.
Thank you very much. And Mathias Burghardt already started my presentation by showing some of the investments we did as EWE. But I'm happy to share some insights with you, and I just want to briefly touch on 3 projects which are finally then put under the roof project you already named Clean Hydrogen Coastline. These 3 examples are upstream, midstream, and downstream I want to share with you. Starting with the upstream project, it's a project on an industrial site in the city of Bremen with ArcelorMittal, a steel production company. And as we heard earlier, the industrial application is one of the lowest barrier entrance opportunities for hydrogen. What we do here, together with ArcelorMittal, we place a 12 megawatt hydrogen electrolyzer on site, using 10 megawatt for the steel production and 2 megawatt for mobility. It's fed by electricity from the grid, following the green electricity definition from the German government. We get a 50% capex grant to start the project. It's well above 20 million to do the investment, which means that the investment as such is supported by 50%. Is it economic yet? No, it's not. If you use the green hydrogen, even with the capex grant, you're still more expensive than taking gray hydrogen or natural gas or coal to get the hydrogen for the steel production. But we see that the gap is closing. With an increasing CO2 price, it will become more profitable. And of course, finally, the steel producers know that they have to go green. So this is the first and relevant step. And for the 2 megawatt we take for mobility, this leads to another project where we use green hydrogen for mobility services. And the price for mobility is potentially much higher. So you can really gain a certain margin on green hydrogen if you use it in the mobility sector. So this is project number 1. Project number 2 is a midstream project where we prove that we can store hydrogen in a cavern underground. We have a huge gas storage business in a salt structure. And east of Berlin, we have a cavern where we store hydrogen underground and prove that it's possible technically from a permission point of view and operationally, so that we are ready to provide midstream businesses, means large-scale storage for hydrogen to deal with the volatility of the renewables feeding into the system. The third project is on downstream side. It's a project, again, in the region with 90 partners, more than 90 million to invest. It's about scaling in mobility with heavy-duty trucks, passenger cars, fueling stations, and renewable generation for getting green hydrogen. It's a project together with 90 partners in the region where we not just showcase and we do not develop, but we scale really the market in providing mobility by hydrogen to this region. All these projects are put in a kind of roof project, which is called Clean Hydrogen Coastline. It means that the whole northwest of Germany has the ideal situation for becoming a hotspot of hydrogen in Europe. Why? We have the renewable generation, onshore, offshore. We have the harbors to import hydrogen. We have the salt structure geographically to store underground. We have the pipelines to transport it, and all this gives a great opportunity. The region starts from the Dutch border on the left-hand side or the western side, reaches out to Hamburg. And this is the project we proposed to the German federal government to become an EPCI project, important project of common European interest. The German federal government has supported this, and now we are in Brussels hoping to get this support there as well. So overall, it's a number of projects we put together under this one roof, the Clean Hydrogen Coastline project. We run as EWE, as a consortium leader, together with other partners.
Thank you, Dr. Kuysen. Very interesting project, obviously. It covers the full hydrogen value chain, which makes it a systemic project, which is effectively exactly what Daryl was explaining at the beginning as being one of the key pillars of making those kind of projects sustainable. So I see this as very interesting. And on top of that, you were mentioning that it was almost economical and comparable with the cost that you would get from natural gas. So with increasing CO2 price, it will be fully competitive. So extremely interesting project, and congratulations for running it. And of course, we'd be very interested to follow up on this opportunity. Maybe now let's move to finish this panel from Germany to America. Martin, very pleased to have you again, to meet you again on this panel. How are you today?
Doing great, thank you, Amir. Yeah, it's very hot here, but other than that, it's...
It looks like it. You're the CEO of Skyline Renewables, a renewable energy company in America with over 1 gigawatt capacity. We are a lucky owner of this company as Ardian. Maybe a question, to put things in perspective. We had Secretary Moniz at the introduction of this panel. How do you see the Biden administration's appetite for renewable energy, and how would that impact your business?
Well, as you can imagine, I am really happy about what's going on right now. So the Biden administration is doing the right things in order to promote a clean economy, a clean industry with a pragmatic view. They are not trying to do things in a rush. They are trying to do things in a way and trying to get bipartisan agreements, which, by the way, I think is the only way to get durable transition and changes in things. Yeah. So just to give you a fact, a data point, in the last few months, we have seen an increase in prices of the renewable energy certificates, which are the green tax that are attached to the megawatts in the renewable megawatts in the US of more than 3 times. Yeah? So right now we are taking advantage of that situation by selling our RECs at a much better price that we were doing last year. Yeah? So the Biden plan, from my point of view, has 3 big items that are important for renewables. One is setting all these milestones about when the economy has to be decarbonized, when the power has to be fully without CO2 and things like that, yeah, and for the different sectors. So that's very important because it's putting a lot of pressure in the industry and increasing the demand for renewables. The second piece is the electric vehicles. So promoting electric vehicles is going to increase the demand for electricity. And the guys that are actually buying electric vehicles, they want something that is not polluting. They don't like the electricity to be generated from fossil fuels. So they are going also to push for more renewables. So is electricity the one I like renewable? Yeah. And finally, but also something that is extremely important, and we've been lagging in the US for many, many years, is electrical infrastructure. Some of the biggest issues we have in the US is transmission, and improving the transmission, having more transmission lines that communicate in the places where we can generate cheap renewable energy to the places where the demand of that renewable energy is done is very, very key, and it's going to be very important.
Martin, maybe to link now a bit more specifically to your business, we have talked about the intermittency of renewables, and of course you're in this business. How do you see hydrogen playing a role in this respect?
Well, I am glad that you mentioned that, and I heard Mathias before, and that's very, we completely share that view. Initially, my view about hydrogen was as a vehicle for being able to store significant amounts of electricity, which, as you know, is the key issue that we have in renewables. So we can produce electricity, but we cannot produce when we want it. With hydrogen, we'll be able to do that. But in addition to that, this is very extremely important that right now there is more things that we can do. So basically, for our business, what we are doing right now is to try other uses of hydrogen, not just storage. That probably is going to take a little longer. And we are offering PPAs where we are actually complying with the generation profile in order to comply with the demand from the customers, but also always completely green. So we are providing green hydrogen produced fully from renewables by adding these renewable energy certificates I mentioned before to our production when we are not able to generate, or by selling the extra electricity. In any case, guaranteeing the customer that they are getting completely green energy.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Martin. I think with this note that you are giving, showing the importance and the complementarity between the renewable world and the hydrogen world, there is a lot of opportunities that will be arising. So this is really interesting, and maybe I can take this opportunity to close this panel by thanking you, Martin, but also Dr. Kuysen, Mr. Oreja, and Ingegnere Mazzoncini. This was a really impressive feat that we had today. So I would really like to thank the speakers that were here around the round table for this industry talk. We were treated with some fantastic insights and food for thought from across Europe and Americas. On my side, it was truly an honor to chair the discussion, and of course, I hope there will be many more discussions to follow with you.
Thank you so much, Amir, for hosting this panel and discussion on this very important topic. And we actually now welcome our new guest on set, Pierre-Etienne Franc. Thank you so much for being with us. You are the CEO of 5T Hydrogen. Let's now discuss on investing in climate action. And we still have on set Amir Sharifi and Mathias Burghardt, and of course Pierre-Etienne Franc, who just joined us. I'm actually very impressed to see all these important projects developing on a wide reach across all geographies. But Mathias, let me ask you a question. How will Ardian seize this hydrogen opportunity?
First of all, as you see, we are very fortunate to have so those companies, or all of those companies which are so dynamic and already quite advanced in their hydrogen projects. And so obviously they will be the main source of opportunities. And so not only they bring us the investment opportunities, which as they are very professional, and they are able to make assess those projects and understand what are our key criteria for us, that was mentioned by Amir. But also, I was mentioned before, they also teach us. But our duty then is to learn fast. We cannot make them waste their time. And for that, it's very important that we have a dedicated task force, as I mentioned before, and to bring the experts such as Fabio in our team, in order we speak the same language and that we are more efficient, and that above all we are able to bring the most cost-efficient, cost of capital investors to finance the project. Cost of capital will be a key driver of the cost of hydrogen.
And this dedicated task force is led by Amir Sharifi. I have understood that you manage this Ardian hydrogen team.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to be in charge of a dedicated team. 7 people who are across Europe and Americas are dedicated to this topic, and it's really thrilling to see a number of projects. And we've been taught as well by an operating partner that you have seen before, Fabio. He has trained us a lot about the industry, so we've learned a lot on the way. We've been then setting up a dedicated workforce with the different portfolio companies, 10 portfolio companies that I mentioned earlier, together that are present across the whole value chain, from production to midstream to downstream. So with this, we can have a global view. Maybe what we can also say is that what we have heard along the summit is that regulation and trade will be a key element of this play. And on our side, we are currently applying to become member of the Hydrogen Council and of the Hydrogen Europe. So this will greatly benefit our network and understanding of the policy environment. So we will work, I think, hand in hand with our portfolio companies, with industrial partners, to be involved, I would say, in all the countries where we will want to invest. We're, of course, very open to work with counterparts. We think it's a collective effort to raise the market to maturity. So it's not just, people should not go on their own. I think working in teams is really important, and we should build a strong market for hydrogen infrastructure investment thanks to cooperation.
Thank you so much, Amir. And it's pretty clear that Ardian is very much dedicated to this topic. Pierre-Etienne Franc, thank you for attending our summit today. Pierre-Etienne, you're very well known in the hydrogen world as well. You were the founder and former co-secretary of Hydrogen Council and president of Hydrogen Europe. And beyond this role in managing Air Liquide activities in the hydrogen technology and corporate venture fields over the last 10 years, Pierre-Etienne, can you tell us how and why, after 25 years of working on hydrogen at Air Liquide, you decided to make a big change in your career?
So I didn't work 25 years in hydrogen, but 25 years in Air Liquide, yes, and it's true that progressively, with the time, over the last 10 years, even though the portfolio I was managing was broader than hydrogen, I spent more and more of my time in hydrogen, and I became more addicted to hydrogen than to Air Liquide. And it's true also that for those of you who know all the efforts that we've pushed forward over the last years to frame the sector, to gather the vision, to set up a narrative, to build the momentum where it is today, I have been advocating for the need for infra funds over the last 2 years. And it happens that a mix of things as catalyst in a way. The momentum has increased with the COVID need for recovery plans, has generated a big policy support that you've seen explained by the policymakers earlier today. Many projects are moving to scale. You've had seen some numbers. And I had the opportunity to start building a project around the infrastructure fund called 5T Hydrogen. So it's exactly what we wanted to do. It's basically to try to mobilize forces between the industry players and the financial players. Exactly what Ardian is trying to do now with its key operating partners and the companies that you are invested in. Trying to basically move a sector which is still nascent, with still some risk on technology, on loads, on pricing escalation, to an infrastructure business. Hydrogen is going to be the asset class of the next decade, that's for sure. The question is to be the first one in the game to make sure that this venture to infra approach is working. And this is what we are trying to do. And when I looked into those infra funds, I found that there were many players that have renewable funds with a pocket for hydrogen. But if you don't have a pure play, focused fund, which is basically gathering industry expertise and financial expertise, is going to be very difficult to move the community into that. This is what we are doing. We've started 3 months ago. We are small, we are young. We are very lucky to get some support, initial support from industrial players from the US, 300 million worth of early support, but we will need more. And hopefully Ardian may be a help for that, because we need some investment expertise and we need fund managers like Ardian to basically help us move down the road in the future. But we will see what's next.
And the momentum is indeed here. Thank you so much, Pierre-Etienne Franc, for this. Mathias, what kind of transactions will you be investing in?
Well, we aim to invest in the full chain of hydrogen. First of all, as I mentioned before, we want to be on the upstream side by producing hydrogen in particular through our renewable energy platforms. We also want to be in the midstream segment, and there we are, as you know, very strong with companies such as Geocell, SPMR, which is a major pipeline infrastructure in France. We have this partnership with Adwea in Italy, and also shareholder of Ortua Rete Gas, one of the largest distribution companies of gas in Italy. And we will always obviously love to work closely with Enagas in Spain. Last but not least, the downstream sector is very important, and there we, as you know, we are a very large player in the transport industry, both on airports and airports like Milan Airport, for example, which has already projects in the hydrogen segment, but as well on the road sector, being one of the first mover in the refueling stations. So all these we want really to cover the full segment. But for this we need basically different things. We need to partner with industrial companies, as was mentioned before, but we also need to partner with experts and professionals which are dedicated to that, and that's why we are very happy to this conversation, discussion, maybe more at some point with Pierre-Etienne and 5T. I think we are very lucky to be at the infancy of this new asset class, as was mentioned by Pierre-Etienne, that I think will be the largest asset class as well in the infrastructure world in the next decade.
That's true that you have a common vision.
We are starting a discussion.
It's the beginning of a romance.
I can tell from both of your answers that you do have a common vision on that. To conclude, Mathias?
Yes. To conclude, we believe that there is plenty of quality projects with great professionals fully dedicated to this industry, and that we to be really at the beginning and the first movers of this hydrogen world, which is just starting, but that will be really big. I think it's for investors, for our clients, is really the right point in time to focus on this new industry, because there will be a premium to the first mover into industry, as it happens in the renewable energy space. For that, one very important condition is the regulation, is the regulator who will solve this chicken and egg issue that we mentioned before, and that's critical to if we want to meet this crucial target of the carbon neutrality by 2050. So I think this is an important step, because we managed to gather the different industry experts, the regulator, the industrial, the industrials, yes, to show our clients that this is happening, this is now, and that they need to consider very seriously this asset class. Because again, in a few years it will be too late, and there will be a clear premium to the one who have moved first.
And you do have a solid base for that. Thank you so much, Mathias. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Pierre-Etienne, for being on set. And thank you to all of our participants for joining this very important discussions and all our panels. We had a marvelous time on set, and we hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did here behind your screen. Thank you to our brilliant speakers for taking some time to answer all our question, and thank you to you, our incredible audience, for joining us on this very important topic. Thank you, and see you soon. I hope to speak more about Ardian's initiatives very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margot.